Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. On February 13th, 2017, the small town of Redwood Falls, tucked into the wooded outskirts of northern Ohio, was unusually quiet. School was out for the day, and winter still held the town in a gray, half-frozen grip. 13-year-old Maya Collins and 14-year-old Hannah Reed had been counting down to the break, excited to spend the day together without homework or early alarms. The girls had been inseparable for years, bonded by shared classes, inside jokes, and long conversations that stretched late into the night over text messages. That Monday afternoon, they convinced Hannah's father, Greg Reed, to drop them off at Ravens Crossing Trail, a scenic walking path known for its old iron footbridge and winding creek below. The bridge had become something of a local landmark, drawing hikers, photographers, and teenagers looking for a quiet place to wander. Despite the cold, the girls were eager to get outside, bundled in hoodies and jackets, their breath fogging in the air as they climbed into the car. Greg dropped them off shortly after 1 p.m., reminding them to stay together and be back at the parking area by mid-afternoon. They promised they would. As the car pulled away, neither man nor girls had any reason to believe this would be anything more than an ordinary afternoon. The trail was mostly empty when Maya and Hannah started walking. Bare trees stretched overhead, their branches clicking softly in the wind. The creek below the bridge moved slowly, its surface broken by thin sheets of ice near the edges. The girls laughed as they crossed the narrow iron span, teasing each other about who would get the best photo for social media. At 2:07 p.m., Hannah pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of Maya walking ahead of her on the bridge, arms outstretched slightly for balance. She posted it to her story with a simple caption, "Nothing unusual, nothing alarming." That image would later become the last public glimpse of either girl alive. After crossing the bridge, the girls continued along the trail, unaware that time was slipping away. When 3:30 p.m. came and went, Greg arrived at the agreed pickup point and waited. He called Hannah's phone once, then again. Each call went unanswered. At first, he assumed the girls were distracted or had wandered a little farther than planned. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the trail, calling their names, his voice echoing faintly through the trees. As the minutes passed, concern began to replace patience. He walked the same route the girls would have taken, checking the bridge, the nearby paths, even the creek bank. There was no sign of them. At 4 p.m., with daylight already starting to fade, Greg called Hannah's grandmother and then Maya's mother, Rachel Collins, asking them to come help search. Both women dropped what they were doing and rushed to the trail. The three adults spread out, retracing steps, checking side paths, calling the girls' names again and again. The woods answered only with silence. Around this time, Hannah's phone stopped connecting entirely. By 5:30 p.m., fear had fully set in. The police were called, and officers arrived within minutes, quickly realizing that this was no ordinary case of kids running late. A formal search began almost immediately. Officers, firefighters, and volunteers combed the area with flashlights as darkness settled over the trail. The bridge was searched, the creek banks examined, nearby roads checked. There were no screams, no obvious signs of a struggle, no discarded belongings. By late evening, the search was suspended due to poor visibility and safety concerns, leaving the families to go home without answers. That night was unbearable. Rachel Collins barely slept, replaying the last conversation she'd had with Maya, wondering if she had missed some warning sign. Greg sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, hoping for a message that never came. Friends and relatives filled the house, speaking in hushed tones, clinging to the idea that the girls would be found safe in the morning. At first light the next day, the search resumed on a much larger scale. K-9 units were brought in, along with state police, dive teams, and federal agents. Helicopters scanned the wooded area from above. The trail and surrounding private properties were searched methodically, acre by acre. Hundreds of volunteers joined in, forming search lines through thick brush and muddy terrain. Just before noon, one of the volunteers made a discovery near the edge of Blackwater Creek, roughly half a mile from the footbridge. The area was part of a privately owned stretch of land, rarely visited and partially hidden from the main trail. Authorities were called in immediately, and the area was secured. It did not take long for officials to confirm what everyone feared. The bodies of 2 young girls were found near the water. The search stopped instantly. Families were escorted away as investigators took over. By the next day, authorities confirmed that the victims were Maya Collins and Hannah Reed. No cause of death was publicly released, and police offered few details, stating only that the investigation was ongoing. The town of Redwood Falls was shattered. Vigils were held at the local high school. Flowers and stuffed animals lined the entrance to Raven's Crossing Trail. Parents held their children a little tighter. The question everyone asked was the same. How could this have happened in the middle of the day on a familiar trail in a town where people rarely locked their doors? Within days, police released a photograph of a man they wanted to speak with. They stressed that he was not officially named a suspect, but was believed to have been on the trail around the same time as the girls. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, showing a man wearing a jacket and cap, his face partially obscured. A week later, investigators revealed something even chilling. The image had come from Hannah's phone. Along with the photo, police released a short audio clip recorded around the same time. In the recording, a man's voice could be heard giving brief instructions. Authorities did not explain why the recording existed, but many believed Hannah sensed something was wrong and made the conscious decision to document what she could. The release of the photo and audio sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Tips poured in from across the country. Everyone seemed to know someone who looked like the man in the image. Posters appeared in gas stations, grocery stores, and highway rest stops. The case quickly gained national attention, turning the quiet town of Redwood Falls into the center of an intense and growing mystery. As investigators followed leads and sifted through thousands of tips, one fact became increasingly clear. Whatever happened to Maya and Hannah was not random, and whoever was responsible had vanished back into everyday life, blending in unnoticed. And for the families left behind, the waiting had only just begun. In the weeks following the discovery of Maya Collins and Hannah Reed, Redwood Falls became a town living under a microscope. News vans lined the streets near Raven's Crossing Trail. National reporters stood in front of the bridge where the girls had last been seen, repeating the same questions day after day. How did no one see anything? How could 2 girls vanish in broad daylight? And most of all, who was the man captured on Hannah's phone? Investigators were cautious with information. They confirmed the image and audio came directly from Hannah's device, but they would not say exactly how long the man had been near the girls or what led up to the recording. The uncertainty fueled speculation. Some believed the girls had been followed from the moment they stepped onto the trail. Others wondered if the encounter was sudden, a chance crossing that turned violent in minutes. Police made it clear that the man in the image was central to the investigation. Though they avoided the word suspect, they urged the public to study the photograph carefully. The image showed a middle-aged man, average height and build, wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low. His hands were in his pockets. His posture appeared casual, almost unremarkable, which made him all the more unsettling. He looked like someone who could pass unnoticed in any crowd. A week later, law enforcement held a press conference to address the growing pressure. They released a slightly longer audio clip from Hannah's phone. The voice was calm, controlled, and firm. It was not raised, not frantic. That detail disturbed investigators as much as the public. Whoever he was, he did not sound nervous. He sounded confident. The families listened to the clip privately before it was made public. Rachel Collins later said it was the hardest thing she had ever heard. It felt like listening to the moment her daughter slipped out of reach forever. Tips flooded in by the thousands. Some were detailed, others vague. Many contradicted each other. People claimed to recognize the man from the trail, from a gas station, from a grocery store miles away. Police chased each lead, slowly narrowing the field. One of the first men publicly connected to the case was Evan Rollins, a drifter who had been arrested in another state weeks after the murders for threatening hikers on a remote trail. Rollins had a criminal history, and his appearance bore a rough resemblance to the man in the photo. He was questioned extensively, and for a time, many believed the case was close to being solved. But the evidence did not hold. Rollins could not be placed anywhere near Redwood Falls on the day the girls disappeared. Eventually, police announced that he was no longer considered a person of interest. The disappointment was crushing. Other names surfaced and faded just as quickly. A convicted offender from a neighboring city, a former factory worker who lived near the trail, a man who owned property close to Blackwater Creek. Each theory ignited hope, then collapsed under scrutiny. Behind the scenes, investigators were working through data pulled from Hannah's phone. Messages, app activity, location pings, and deleted files were all examined. What emerged was a troubling realization. The girls may not have encountered their killer by chance. Digital analysts uncovered signs that Hannah had been communicating online with someone using a false identity in the months before her death. The profile used stock photos and claimed to belong to a teenage boy from a nearby town. Conversations appeared harmless at first, filled with jokes and talk about school, but over time, the tone shifted. The person behind the account asked personal questions, pushed boundaries, and attempted to learn the girls' routines. Authorities would not confirm whether this online contact was directly linked to the murders, but they acknowledged it was a significant focus of the investigation. The possibility that Maya and Hannah had been targeted shook the community deeply. Parents began monitoring their children's online activity more closely. Schools held assemblies about internet safety. Fear spread beyond Redwood Falls. 2 years passed with no arrest. Then, in the spring of 2019, police announced a major development. The investigation, they said, had entered a new phase. A revised suspect sketch was released, created after reanalyzing witness statements and digital evidence. This new image depicted a younger man, possibly between 18 and 40, with softer features than the original sketch. The change suggested that early assumptions may have been wrong. Along with the new sketch, police released an extended audio recording. The voice was clearer now, offering a better sense of the speaker's age and accent. Investigators believed the man lived in or frequently visited Redwood Falls. He was not a stranger passing through. He knew the area. During the same announcement, police revealed they were searching for the owner of a vehicle seen parked near an abandoned building not far from the trail on the day of the murders. The car had been there for several hours during the exact window when Maya and Hannah disappeared. No one had come forward to claim it. The message from law enforcement grew more direct, almost confrontational. They spoke as if addressing the killer personally, stating that he was likely hiding in plain sight, blending into everyday life, confident he had gotten away with it. They said someone close to him might already suspect the truth. For the families, hope flickered again. Rachel Collins attended every press conference, clinging to each new detail. Greg Reed stopped speaking publicly, but continued to cooperate fully with investigators, answering the same painful questions again and again. In 2021, another potential suspect emerged. Lucas Harper, a man arrested for an unrelated crime involving a child, lived within driving distance of Redwood Falls. His online activity raised red flags, and investigators confirmed he had visited hiking trails across the region. For months, police quietly examined his movements and communications. Once again, speculation exploded. Social media lit up with theories. Some were well-researched, others were reckless and harmful. Harper was eventually ruled out, but the cycle repeated itself. Hope, obsession, disappointment. Later that year, investigators made a startling announcement. They had identified a network of fake online profiles used to contact young girls across several states. One of the accounts had interacted with Hannah shortly before her death. The profile belonged to a real person, though the images used were stolen from someone else entirely. Search warrants were executed, electronics were seized, interviews were conducted behind closed doors. Authorities would not say whether the person behind the profile was present on the trail that day, only that the account was relevant. As the years dragged on, the case weighed heavily on everyone involved. The bridge at Raven's Crossing became a symbol of grief. Some people refused to visit it. Others went regularly, leaving flowers and notes, refusing to let the girls be forgotten. Then, in late 2022, nearly 6 years after the murders, police announced an arrest. A local man named Thomas Keene, a longtime resident of Redwood Falls, was taken into custody. He had worked various jobs around town and was known to frequent the trails. Witnesses placed him near Raven's Crossing on the day Maya and Hannah disappeared. Ballistics evidence linked him to an item found at the crime scene. Most damning of all, investigators said Keene had made incriminating statements to both police and someone close to him. The news hit like a thunderclap. Some residents were stunned. Others said they were not surprised. Keene was described as quiet, unremarkable, someone who rarely drew attention. As the case moved toward trial, details slowly emerged. Prosecutors alleged that Keene encountered the girls on the trail, forced them off the path, and committed acts of violence that ended their lives. The defense maintained his innocence, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and flawed. For the families, the arrest brought a strange mix of relief and dread. Answers were closer than ever, but the truth, whatever it was, would be unbearable. And as the trial approached, Redwood Falls braced itself for the final chapter of a story that had already taken so much. The trial of Thomas Keene began in the fall, nearly 8 years after Maya Collins and Hannah Reed were found near Blackwater Creek. By then, Redwood Falls no longer felt like the same town it once had. The case had reshaped it. People remembered time by what came before and after the girls disappeared. Businesses near the trail had closed. Families who once spent weekends hiking now avoided the area entirely. The bridge still stood, silent and unchanged, but it carried a weight that never lifted. Keene entered the courtroom without spectacle. He wore plain clothes, his expression blank, eyes fixed forward. To some, he looked smaller than expected. To others, the ordinariness was terrifying. This was not a monster hiding in the shadows, but a man who had lived among them for years. Prosecutors began by outlining a timeline that stretched back to the early afternoon of the day the girls went missing. Surveillance footage placed Keene near the trailhead shortly after Maya and Hannah were dropped off. Witnesses testified to seeing a man matching his description walking alone, then later standing near the bridge. One woman recalled feeling uneasy when she passed him, noting the way he watched people rather than the scenery. The prosecution leaned heavily on digital evidence. Data from Hannah's phone placed her near Keene's known movements. The audio recording was played for the jury, the voice steady, unmistakable. Experts testified that the cadence and tone matched Keene's speech patterns. It was not definitive on its own, they admitted, but when combined with everything else, it formed a clear picture. One of the most compelling moments came when a forensic analyst explained the significance of an unspent round found near the crime scene. Ballistics testing showed that it matched a firearm owned by Keene. The defense argued that the trail was public and that the round could have been dropped there at any time. The prosecution countered that the odds of such a coincidence were extraordinarily low. Former co-workers testified that Keene had been at work earlier that day but left abruptly, claiming he felt ill. Phone records showed no calls made during the hours the girls disappeared. Investigators described interviews in which Keene gave conflicting accounts of his whereabouts, sometimes placing himself at home, sometimes on errands, sometimes nowhere at all. Perhaps the most difficult testimony came from someone close to Keene. A former partner took the stand and described conversations in which Keene made vague but disturbing comments, expressing guilt and fear of being discovered. The defense challenged her credibility, suggesting resentment and misinterpretation. Still, her words lingered in the courtroom long after she stepped down. Throughout the trial, the family sat only a few rows behind the prosecution. Rachel Collins clutched a photo of Maya taken just weeks before her death. Greg Reed stared straight ahead, rarely blinking. They listened to every detail, every reconstruction of moments they wished they could forget but needed to hear. The defense focused on doubt. They argued that the investigation had been flawed from the start, that early missteps tainted later conclusions. They pointed out how many suspects had come and gone over the years, how certainty had shifted repeatedly. They questioned the reliability of witness memories so long after the fact. They suggested that Keene had been targeted simply because he fit the narrative authorities were desperate to close. Keene himself did not testify. His attorneys said he had nothing to add beyond his prior statements. The jury was instructed not to hold that against him, but the silence spoke loudly to many in the room. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. Deliberations lasted 4 days. Redwood Falls waited in a tense stillness. When the verdict was finally announced, the courtroom filled quickly. People stood shoulder to shoulder, barely breathing as the jury foreperson arose. Guilty. The word seemed to echo. Keene was convicted on multiple counts related to the deaths of Maya Collins and Hannah Reed. The judge later sentenced him to a term that ensured he would never walk free again. As the sentence was read, Keene showed little reaction. He stared ahead, jaw clenched, as though the outcome had been inevitable. For the families, the moment brought a strange, hollow relief. Justice, yes, but not peace. Nothing could restore what had been taken. Rachel Collins later said that the verdict closed a chapter, but the story would always live inside her. In the months that followed, the town began the slow process of healing. Memorials were placed near the trail, not as warnings but as reminders. Schools established scholarships in the girls' names. Community groups formed to advocate for child safety and digital awareness, inspired by the lessons learned through unimaginable loss. Questions still lingered. Why had Keene chosen that day? Had the girls been targeted in advance, or was it opportunity? Investigators maintained that while every detail might never be known, the evidence supported a clear conclusion. Still, unanswered questions haunted those who needed absolute certainty. What endured most was the bravery of Maya and Hannah. Hannah's decision to record the man on the trail was seen by many as an act of instinctive courage, a moment of awareness that ultimately helped bring their killer to justice. Maya's presence beside her, unwavering and loyal, spoke of a bond that never broke, even in the face of fear. Their families continue to speak about them not as victims, but as girls full of life, humor, and dreams. Maya loved photography and wanted to travel. Hannah dreamed of becoming a teacher. They were more than a case, more than headlines. Redwood Falls will always carry their story. The bridge still stands, but now it is also a place of remembrance. People pause there, leave flowers, whisper promises to do better, to protect the vulnerable, to listen more closely. The case is closed in the eyes of the law, but its impact remains. It changed how a town sees safety, how families talk to their children, how strangers are perceived. It reminded everyone that danger does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it walks quietly, blending in, waiting. And it reminded the world of two girls whose courage, even in their final moments, helped ensure that the truth would not stay buried. In the spring of 2018, the row house-lined streets of Brookhaven, a working-class neighborhood just outside Wilmington, Delaware, were waking up to warmer days. Flowering trees were beginning to bloom along the sidewalks, and neighbors sat on their stoops, talking about summer plans. It was in this quiet stretch of town that 23-year-old Marina Cole was trying to hold her life together while preparing to welcome a new one. Marina was 8 months pregnant with her second child. Her pregnancy had been labeled high risk early on, and doctors had placed her on strict bed rest. The baby was breech, and Marina struggled with swelling, dizziness, and sharp pains that made walking difficult. Driving was out of the question. Most days, she moved slowly from her bedroom to the couch, resting often, her hand instinctively placed on her stomach as if to reassure herself that everything would be all right. Despite the physical limitations, Marina's mind was always busy. Friends described her as warm and thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and checked in when someone seemed off. She loved decorating and had a natural eye for making small spaces feel like home. Her tiny apartment was filled with soft lighting, family photos, and children's books stacked neatly in the corner for her 4-year-old daughter, Lena, who was the center of her world. Marina's days revolved around Lena and phone calls with family. Her mother lived across town and visited often, helping with groceries and childcare. Marina leaned on her family heavily during the pregnancy, and they in turn admired her determination. She talked often about starting fresh, about finding a better place to live where there would be more space for 2 children. She wanted stability. She wanted peace. On May 9th, Marina asked an older family acquaintance, Daryl Moore, to drive her into Wilmington. Daryl had known Marina since she was a teenager and occasionally helped her get around when she needed it. That afternoon, he picked her up and drove her to a bank near the Riverfront district. Surveillance footage later confirmed Marina entering the bank slowly, holding the railing as she climbed the short set of stairs. Inside, Marina withdrew $560 in cash. According to her mother, the money was meant for a security deposit on a new apartment she had been eyeing. Marina had spoken excitedly about the place. It was nothing fancy, but it had 2 bedrooms, better lighting, and a playground nearby. To her, it represented a chance to reset her life and create a safer environment for her children. Just days later, on May 13th, Marina was supposed to be the guest of honor at a baby shower and gender reveal party planned by her sisters and closest friends. They had spent weeks organizing it. Pink and blue decorations filled the community hall. A cake sat on the table, waiting to be cut. There were wrapped gifts stacked carefully in the corner, many of them practical items Marina had specifically asked for: diapers, blankets, bottles. But Marina never arrived. At first, no one panicked. Marina was often late, and with her condition, delays were expected. Friends sent texts, joking reminders, and eventually concerned messages asking if she was okay. Hours passed. The cake melted slightly under the warm lights. Guests exchanged uneasy looks. By the end of the afternoon, the concern had shifted into something heavier. Marina's phone went straight to voicemail. Her mother tried calling again and again, her unease growing with each unanswered ring. Finally, a small group of friends decided to drive to Marina's apartment. What they found only deepened the worry. The apartment was unlocked, but empty. Marina was not there. Lena was not there. At first glance, it looked as if Marina had moved out. Her dresser was gone, her clothes were missing from the closet, personal items that she never went anywhere without, her purse, her medications, her prenatal paperwork, were nowhere to be found. But the bed remained. So did the baby crib, half assembled in the corner. The room felt frozen in time, like someone had interrupted the process halfway through. To Marina's family, the scene made no sense. Because of her medical condition, Marina could barely stand for more than a few minutes at a time. There was no possible way she could have carried furniture or boxes. She didn't have a car. And if she had planned to move, she would have told someone. She always did. The following morning, on May 14th, Marina was officially reported missing. Police officers arrived to conduct a welfare check and initial search. They spoke to neighbors who said they hadn't seen Marina leave. Some recalled hearing nothing unusual. Others admitted they rarely paid attention to who came and went. The apartment complex's security cameras, officers discovered, were not working that week due to a maintenance issue. There was no footage to review. Detectives interviewed Marina's friends and family, all of whom said the same thing. Marina would never leave her daughter behind. She would never disappear without saying goodbye, and she would certainly never miss her own baby shower. Attention soon turned to the father of Marina's unborn child, Trevor Lane. Trevor was a familiar name to Marina's family, but not one that inspired comfort. He was older than Marina, someone she had known through extended family connections. Their relationship had been complicated from the beginning. Trevor had a long-term girlfriend at the time Marina became pregnant, along with several children from previous relationships. In the weeks leading up to Marina's disappearance, her family noticed changes in her mood when Trevor's name came up. She became quiet, withdrawn. She avoided questions. Once, during a late-night phone call with her sister, Marina admitted she felt overwhelmed and pressured, though she never went into detail. When Marina vanished, Trevor did not attend the baby shower. He did not call her mother. He did not reach out to check on Lena. He did not participate in any of the early search efforts organized by friends or volunteers. Still, at that stage, police did not name him a suspect or even a person of interest. Days later, during a small candlelight vigil held outside Marina's apartment complex, friends and family gathered to pray and share memories. As they cleaned up afterwards, one of Marina's cousins noticed something odd in a nearby shrub. It was Marina's bank card. The card looked clean, barely scuffed, as if it hadn't been exposed to the elements for long. Family members were immediately alarmed. Officers had already searched the area days earlier and found nothing. The discovery raised uncomfortable questions. Had the card been placed there later? And if so, by whom? As the days turned into weeks, the search expanded. Flyers were posted across Brookhaven and Wilmington. Tips trickled in, but none led to Marina or her unborn child. Each passing day weighed heavier on her family, who struggled with the uncertainty and the growing fear that Marina hadn't simply walked away. From the very beginning, they believed something terrible had happened. And as investigators slowly began to piece together Marina's last known movements, a darker picture started to emerge, one that would take years to fully come into focus. In the weeks after Marina Cole disappeared, life in Brookhaven settled into an uneasy rhythm. On the surface, the neighborhood looked the same. Kids rode bikes past the corner store. Buses rumbled down Main Street. But for Marina's family, time felt suspended, measured only by unanswered questions and sleepless nights. Her mother, Diane Cole, kept Marina's phone charged on the kitchen counter, just in case it rang. Every morning she checked her messages, hoping for something new. Every night she replayed their last conversation in her head, searching for signs she might have missed. Marina had sounded tired that evening, but not desperate. She talked about the baby shower, about how swollen her feet were, about how Lena had been practicing singing to her unborn sibling. Nothing about that conversation sounded like goodbye. Detectives from the Wilmington Police Department began to dig deeper into Marina's final days. Bank records confirmed the cash withdrawal on May 9th. Phone records showed a handful of calls and texts afterward, mostly with family. There were gaps, though, stretches of time where Marina's phone was silent. Investigators could not say whether that meant the phone was off, out of battery, or simply unused. One detail stood out almost immediately. The night before Marina vanished, she had exchanged several tense messages with Trevor Lane. At first, police downplayed their significance. Couples argued all the time, they said. Stress was common, especially with an unplanned pregnancy. But as detectives reviewed the messages more closely, the tone raised eyebrows. Trevor seemed agitated, demanding, frustrated about money and plans that were falling apart. Marina's responses were shorter, more guarded. At one point, she wrote that she was exhausted and wanted things to calm down. Those messages ended abruptly. Cell tower data placed Trevor's phone in the same general area as Marina's apartment that night. When questioned, Trevor admitted he had stopped by briefly but claimed the visit was uneventful. According to him, they talked, argued a little, and then he left. He said Marina was alive and fine when he last saw her. There were no witnesses to confirm or deny his version of events. Meanwhile, Marina's family began to uncover things the police either didn't know or hadn't shared. Diane learned that Marina had been quietly packing up small items over the previous week. Not furniture, not boxes, just documents, baby clothes, sentimental items. It wasn't a move in the traditional sense. It felt more like preparation. Marina had told her sister she wanted to get things in order before the baby arrived. That detail only deepened the mystery. If Marina had been planning to leave town or start over, why leave behind her bed? Why leave her medication? Why leave Lena? Lena's whereabouts were another troubling question. On the day Marina disappeared, the little girl was supposed to be with Marina's cousin for a few hours, but when the cousin arrived at the apartment, no one answered. Later, Trevor claimed he had picked Lena up and dropped her off with a family friend. That friend confirmed caring for Lena briefly, but said Trevor appeared nervous and in a hurry. Still, nothing about Lena's movements explained Marina's absence. As weeks passed, the case stalled. Police conducted ground searches in nearby parks, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas. Volunteers combed riverbanks and empty lots. Each search ended the same way, with tired feet and no answers. Media attention was minimal at first, limited to short local news segments. Marina's family felt invisible, as if her disappearance didn't matter enough to warrant urgency. Frustration turned into quiet anger. Diane began pressing investigators for updates, only to be told that the case was ongoing and that they were following all leads. When she asked directly whether foul play was suspected, the answer was vague. They could not rule it out, but they could not confirm it either. Privately, detectives were struggling. There was no body, no clear crime scene, no physical evidence tying anyone to a violent act. Everything they had was circumstantial, fragile, and easy to challenge. Then, nearly a year after Marina vanished, something shifted. A detective revisiting the case decided to re-examine Trevor's digital footprint. Technology had advanced since the initial investigation, and new tools allowed for deeper analysis of search histories and deleted data. With a warrant, investigators gained access to Trevor's internet records from the weeks surrounding Marina's disappearance. What they found was troubling. In the days after Marina went missing, Trevor had searched for remote dumping sites outside the city. He had looked up information about landfills, wooded access roads, and how long it took for certain materials to decompose. Individually, those searches might have been explained away. Taken together, they painted a picture that was hard to ignore. Investigators also reviewed financial records. Trevor had experienced sudden cash flow problems around the same time Marina withdrew her money. Phone records showed multiple attempts to contact Marina after she disappeared, followed by long periods of silence. It appeared he knew she was gone but couldn't say why. Detectives brought Trevor in for another interview. This time, the tone was different. They pressed him on inconsistencies in his story. Why did he downplay the argument? Why hadn't he contacted Marina's family when she disappeared? Why did his timeline change slightly each time he spoke to police? Trevor grew defensive. He denied harming Marina. He insisted she must have left on her own. When asked why a pregnant woman on bed rest would vanish without her daughter, money, or documents, he had no answer. Still, without Marina's body, prosecutors hesitated. They needed more. Years passed. Marina's family refused to let her story fade. They organized annual walks in her honor. They flooded social media with her photo, her smile frozen in time. They reached out to journalists, podcasters, anyone who would listen. Slowly, public interest grew. Tips came in from people who claimed to have seen Marina months after her disappearance, though none could be verified. Lena grew older, asking questions no child should have to ask. Diane struggled to explain where her mother had gone, choosing careful words that avoided finality. Then, in early 2022, detectives made a quiet breakthrough. A witness came forward, someone who had known Trevor casually and had heard him say something unsettling years earlier. At the time, it had been brushed off. Now it carried weight. Combined with the digital evidence, the financial records, the cell phone data, and the volatile argument the night before Marina vanished, prosecutors felt they finally had enough to act. On February 8, 2022, Trevor Lane was arrested. The announcement came during a brief press conference. Police emphasized that the case had been built carefully over time, relying on interviews, electronic records, and witness statements. Marina's body had still not been recovered. For Diane, the arrest brought no relief, only a different kind of pain. She had waited years for accountability, but the absence of Marina's remains meant there was no grave to visit, no physical proof to silence doubt. The trial would be long. The defense would argue that without a body, there was no certainty. Trevor maintained his innocence as he was led away in handcuffs. As the legal process began, Marina's family prepared themselves for yet another chapter of waiting. This time, the wait would unfold in courtrooms and headlines under the scrutiny of the public. And at the center of it all remained one haunting truth. Marina Cole was still missing. The months leading up to the trial moved slowly, marked by legal filings, delays, and a constant undercurrent of tension. For Marina Cole's family, it felt like standing at the edge of a long corridor, knowing something waited at the end, but unsure whether it would bring answers or more pain. Trevor Lane remained in custody without bond. From the moment of his arrest, his defense team made one thing clear. They intended to challenge the case at every turn. There was no body, no eyewitness, no forensic evidence tying Trevor directly to Marina's disappearance. Everything, they argued, was speculation stitched together by grief and hindsight. The prosecution saw it differently. In pre-trial hearings, prosecutors laid out a narrative built on timelines, digital footprints, and behavior. They emphasized Marina's high-risk pregnancy, her dependence on others for transportation, and her deep attachment to her daughter. This was not someone who vanished voluntarily. This was someone who had plans, obligations, and people waiting for her. They pointed to the argument the night before Marina disappeared, described by both phone records and witness accounts. They highlighted Trevor's internet searches, his shifting statements, and his unexplained absence from search efforts. They reminded the court that Trevor was the last known person to see Marina alive. The judge ruled that the case could proceed to trial. When jury selection began, Diane Cole sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, her hands folded in her lap. She had imagined this moment for years, but nothing prepared her for the reality of seeing Trevor just a few feet away. He looked smaller than she remembered, older, his confidence dulled by months behind bars. Still, the sight of him stirred a familiar mix of anger and dread. Opening statements set the tone. The prosecution described Marina as a devoted mother and daughter, someone on the brink of a new chapter who was robbed of that chance. They told jurors they would hear evidence showing motive, opportunity, and a pattern of deception. They asked the jury to listen carefully, to consider what Marina would have had to abandon if she had truly disappeared on her own. The defense countered with doubt. They reminded jurors that emotions could not replace proof. They warned against convicting someone based on assumptions. Marina's body, they said, had never been found because no crime had ever been proven to occur. Witnesses took the stand one by one. Marina's sister testified about the baby shower, about the excitement that filled the weeks leading up to it. She spoke about the day Marina didn't arrive, the panic that followed, and the empty apartment that made no sense. Her voice broke when she described Lena asking when her mother was coming home. Friends testified about Marina's physical limitations late in pregnancy, about how difficult it was for her to move even small objects. A former roommate confirmed that Marina had not asked for help moving and could not have removed her belongings alone. Detectives explained the digital evidence in careful detail. They walked jurors through timelines built from cell tower pings, text messages, and search histories. An expert testified about the significance of the online searches Trevor conducted after Marina disappeared, explaining how patterns could suggest intent rather than coincidence. The defense cross-examined aggressively. They suggested alternative explanations for the searches: curiosity, stress, fear. They questioned the reliability of cell phone data and emphasized the absence of forensic evidence. They asked why police never found blood, a weapon, or a confirmed location where a crime occurred. Then came the witness who shifted the room. The acquaintance who had come forward years later took the stand and described Trevor's unsettling comments. The defense tried to undermine the testimony, pointing out the delay in reporting it, but the words lingered in the air, heavy and difficult to dismiss. Throughout the trial, Trevor did not testify. As closing arguments approached, the atmosphere in the courtroom tightened. Jurors had listened to weeks of testimony, weighed facts against uncertainty, and sat with the uncomfortable reality that Marina's body might never be found. In their closing, the prosecution spoke quietly but firmly. They told jurors that some crimes are designed to leave no trace, that the absence of a body does not mean the absence of truth. They asked jurors to think about Marina as a person, not just a case file, and to consider what justice meant when silence was all that remained. The defense urged caution. They argued that doubt was not only present, but unavoidable. They warned jurors that a guilty verdict would set a dangerous precedent, one where suspicion outweighed evidence. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Diane spent those days pacing her living room, clutching her phone, replaying every moment of the trial. She thought about Marina as a child, about her laughter, her stubbornness, the way she loved lavender-scented candles and soft music in the evenings. She wondered if she would ever know where her daughter was laid to rest, or if uncertainty would be her companion for the rest of her life. When the jury returned, the courtroom filled quickly. The foreperson stood, hands trembling slightly, and read the verdict. Guilty, on both counts. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Diane closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. It was not relief exactly. It was validation, a recognition that Marina mattered, that her disappearance was not invisible, that someone had been held accountable. Trevor Lane was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. The judge spoke about the gravity of the crime, about the lives taken and the lives forever altered. He acknowledged the absence of Marina's remains and the particular cruelty of denying a family closure. He urged Trevor to consider telling the truth, to give Marina's loved ones the chance to bring her home. Trevor said nothing. Even after the conviction, questions remained. Where was Marina? What exactly happened in those final hours? Would her body ever be found? Investigators continued to search, following up on old leads and new tips. Advances in technology offered hope, but years had passed, and time was not kind to evidence hidden outdoors. Still, Diane held on to the belief that one day someone would speak or something would surface. Lena grew up knowing her mother through stories and photographs. She learned that Marina loved plants, that she read late into the night, that she dreamed of a quieter life for her children. Diane made sure those stories were full of warmth, not fear, even as the shadow of loss followed them. Marina's case became a point of reference in the community, a reminder of how disappearances can hide in plain sight and how persistence can slowly pull truth into the light. Advocacy groups used her story to highlight the importance of taking missing adults seriously, especially those who are vulnerable. Justice, Diane learned, was not a single moment. It was a process, a series of steps forward, each carrying its own weight. Marina Cole was never found, but she was not forgotten.